The blizzard was merciless, but not as cold as Alexander Sterling's heart. He stepped out of the Meridian Grand Hotel at precisely 11:47 p.m., the noise of the charity gala still ringing faintly behind him. Crystal glasses clinking, hollow laughter, the performative generosity of people who would write a check and forget the cause by morning. Alexander had attended because attendance was required, had shaken hands he didn't want to shake, smiled at faces he didn't trust, and donated a figure that made the room gasp, all without feeling a single thing. His limousine, a custom-built Maybach S680, matte black against the white storm, idled at the curb, exhaust fumes curling softly in the frozen air. His bodyguard, Marcus, a former military man who could read Alexander's moods like a weather forecast, held the rear door open without a word. Alexander had almost reached it when he stopped. There, slumped against the front tire of the Maybach, barely visible beneath a thick ridge of blown snow, was a shape that was too small to be anything but a child. For one breathless moment, Alexander stood absolutely still. The blizzard howled. Snow stung his face. The child did not move. "Get her away from the car," he said, his voice flat and automatic, the voice he used when ordering the removal of obstacles. He stepped forward to take his seat. Marcus crouched beside the tiny figure and reached out, and at the exact moment his large hand made contact with her thin shoulder, the little girl raised her head. Alexander froze. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her face was smeared with grime and dried blood, the source of which appeared to be a gash across her forehead, already swollen and angry. Her hair was tangled and matted with ice. She wore what had once been a cotton shirt, a man's shirt, absurdly oversized, hanging off one shoulder, and a pair of thin canvas trousers that ended above her ankles, both garments wholly inadequate for a night that sat at 12 below zero. Her feet were bare. Her bare feet had turned a shade of blue-gray that made Marcus inhale sharply. Beneath those feet, the pristine white snow was stained a diluted, terrible pink. Her eyes, dark brown, enormous in her hollow face, locked onto Alexander's. Her voice came out cracked and barely audible, the voice of someone who had been cold for a very long time. "I only wanted to be warm near the engine." A pause, impossibly small. "I'm sorry I touched your car. I'll go now." She placed her bloodless hands flat against the tire, attempting to push herself upright. Her arms buckled immediately. She slid back into the snow without a sound, without a cry, without a single tear, and lay still. Alexander was not a man who was moved by things. He had built $1 billion empire on the discipline of feeling nothing, of cutting sentiment out of every equation, like a surgeon cutting away dead tissue. He had not cried since he was 9 years old, and he had made a private vow never to do so again. And yet, something in the absolute silence of her surrender, no screaming, no begging, just quiet compliance with the cruelty of the world, struck him somewhere deep and buried and old. "Pick her up," he said to Marcus. His voice had changed. Marcus noticed immediately and asked no questions. It was Alexander himself, however, who stepped forward and gathered the child up. She weighed almost nothing, terrifyingly little for a body this size, like lifting a bundle of kindling. As he lifted her, the oversized shirt slipped further off her shoulder. Alexander went completely still. Marcus saw it too. The man's jaw tightened. Across the little girl's exposed shoulder and the upper plane of her back, beneath a fresh network of bruises and what appeared to be a recent burn, were scars. Dozens of them. Thin, parallel ridges that could only have been made by a strap or a cane, overlapping each other in layers that spoke of systematic, repeated infliction over a very long time. And at the center of her left shoulder blade, unmistakable even in the low amber glow of the streetlights, a brand. A circular mark with an angular design inside it, seared into her skin, perhaps an inch wide. Alexander had not looked at his own left ribcage in the mirror for 20 years. He did not need to look at it now to know exactly what that mark looked like. It looked like that. A noise came out of him, low, quiet, and terrible. Not grief, not pity. Something older and more dangerous than both. "Get the car running," he said to his driver. His voice was completely level. Only his eyes, gone black and still as deep water, gave anything away. "We're going to Harlow Medical Center. Now." He held the little girl against his chest and got into the car, and the Maybach pulled away into the blizzard. In his arms, the child exhaled once, thin and rattling, and did not wake. "Who did this to you?" Alexander said quietly. To no one, to the storm outside, to a past that apparently was not as buried as he had believed. "Who did this to you?" He did not phrase it as a question. He already knew it was a promise. Harlow Medical Center's pediatric emergency ward was quiet at midnight. The particular restrained quiet of controlled urgency, fluorescent lights steady overhead, nurses moving with practiced efficiency. Dr. Clara Hayes was finishing a patient note at the central station when the automatic doors burst open with a gust of Arctic air and a very large bodyguard, followed immediately by a man she did not recognize carrying a motionless child. Clara was on her feet before she had consciously decided to move. What happened? She was already pulling on gloves, scanning the girl's visible injuries with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 6 years in pediatric emergency medicine. "I found her outside." The man's voice was clipped, controlled. He was impeccably dressed, formal wear, she registered peripherally, and his face was the kind of face that was accustomed to being obeyed. Clara filed that information away and paid it no further attention. When, approximately 20 minutes ago, she was unconscious against my car in the snow. Her feet were bare. She had a head wound. Clara took the child from his arms without ceremony. He seemed briefly surprised by her directness and laid her on the examination gurney. A nurse was already there with warming blankets. Clara peeled back the oversized shirt and stopped. Beside her, she heard the large bodyguard, Marcus, quietly leave the room. For a long moment, Clara did not speak. She had been a doctor for 6 years. She had seen things that would give other people nightmares for the rest of their lives. She had learned the hard and necessary discipline of keeping her professional composure regardless of what was placed in front of her, because composure was what her patients needed. She pressed her lips together, breathed through her nose, began to catalog. Head laceration, approximately 3 centimeters, partially clotted, likely from a fall or a blow. Signs of moderate to severe hypothermia. Poor temperature would need confirmation, but the peripheral cyanosis was advanced. Malnourishment, severe, chronic, the kind you saw in poverty or in captivity. Ribs clearly countable under the skin. Bruising across the torso in multiple stages of healing. Purple-black recent injuries alongside the sallow yellow of wounds 2 to 3 weeks old. The cane marks on the back, dozens of them. Burns at various healing stages. And the brand, circular, deliberate, deep. She pressed the call button. "I need a full trauma panel, warming protocol, for access, and I want radiology on standby." She looked up, and someone contact Child Protective Services. Behind her, the man in formal wear had not moved. He stood with his hands in his pockets, watching the child with an expression Clara couldn't entirely read. Something layered and controlled, but with something burning underneath it, the way magma moves beneath solid rock. Clara turned to face him directly. "I'm Dr. Clara Hayes," she said. "Who are you, and what is your relationship to this child?" "Alexander Sterling." "I have no relationship to her. I found her outside." "Mr. Sterling." Clara kept her voice very measured. "The injuries on this child's back are consistent with systematic, repeated physical abuse inflicted over a period of years. The brand on her shoulder blade is deliberate and relatively recent. She is severely malnourished and hypothermic. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes." "Then I need to ask you directly." She held his gaze. She was not, she had decided a long time ago, a woman who was intimidated by powerful men. "Did you do this to her?" A silence fell between them. Alexander Sterling looked at her with those black, still eyes for a long moment. Then, without a word, he unbuttoned the lower portion of his dress shirt and lifted it. Clara looked at his left ribcage. The brand was slightly larger than the girl's, older, the scar tissue fully matured to silver white. But the design was identical, unmistakable. She looked up at his face. Something shifted in her understanding of the situation entirely. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," she said, in a different voice now, still professional, but no longer adversarial. "I think you and I have something important to discuss." He buttoned his shirt and sat. "Her name," Alexander said, "I don't know yet. She hasn't spoken since she arrived. She may not for some time." Clara pulled a chair across from him, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. "Tell me exactly where you found her and what she said." He told her. Clara listened without interrupting. She was good at listening. It was perhaps her most valuable clinical skill. and as she listened, she turned the information over carefully, assembling a picture. A child escaping somewhere in the middle of a blizzard, bare feet in 12 below zero temperatures, seeking warmth from nothing more than the residual heat of an engine. A brand that matched the one carried by a billionaire who had evidently had a very different kind of childhood than his tailored clothing suggested. "I want to keep her here under my care," Clara said when he'd finished. "She's not going anywhere without a full investigation and a court order, regardless of who shows up claiming guardianship." "Good. I'll need you to make a statement to Child Protective Services." "I'll do more than make a statement." His voice was quiet, but had the quality of something that has made an irreversible decision. "I'm going to find out where she came from, and I'm going to ensure that every single person responsible for what's on her back answers for it." Clara looked at him. The anger was still there, controlled and contained, like something nuclear running at precise temperature behind reinforced walls. She believed him completely. "Then we're on the same side," she said. "It appears so, Dr. Hayes." Behind them, the little girl on the gurney stirred and made a small, frightened sound in her sleep. Both of them turned simultaneously toward her. They heard what she said, murmured from the thin edge of consciousness, in the voice of someone still trapped inside a very bad dream. "I'll be good. Please don't. I'll be so good." Clara stood, moved to the gurney, and placed her hand, gently, steadily, over the child's cold fingers. The murmuring stopped. Alexander watched this from across the room. He did not speak. He did not need to. The little girl's name was Lily. They found it, eventually, on a frayed hospital bracelet around her left wrist, the kind issued by institutional care facilities, with a case number printed below the name. Lily, case number 4471. No surname, no date of birth, just a number. She woke fully at approximately 3 in the morning, in a private room that Clara had arranged, the best room on the pediatric floor, with warm yellow lighting and a window that looked out on the city snow. Her temperature had stabilized. The laceration had been stitched, and 4 delivered fluids and nutrients into her thin arm. She woke, and she looked at the room, the clean white sheets, the softly glowing lamp, the television mounted on the wall, the bowl of warm soup a nurse had left on the bedside table, and she pulled her knees up to her chest and pressed herself against the headboard with the particular stillness of a creature that has learned that beautiful things are reliably followed by pain. Clara was in the chair by the door, half asleep, still in her white coat. She opened her eyes. "Hi," she said softly. "My name is Clara. You're in a hospital. You're safe." Lily looked at her with those enormous dark eyes and said nothing. "You don't have to talk," Clara said. "You don't have to do anything." A long pause. "Am I in trouble?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper, the words chosen with a kind of careful precision that no 8-year-old should have needed to develop. "No, you're not in any trouble." Another pause, and the child seemed to be internally calculating something, running probability assessments that broke Clara's heart to witness. "Is the man who brought me here angry with me? For touching his car?" "No, he's not angry with you." Lily absorbed this. Her eyes traveled to the bowl of soup. Then she looked away from it. "You should eat," Clara said gently. "I'm not hungry." Said too quickly, too automatically, the practiced reflex of someone accustomed to denying their own needs before anyone else could use those needs against them. "It's okay to be hungry, Lily." A silence. The little girl's eyes went back to the soup. Her thin throat moved. "If I eat it now," she said, with a carefulness that made Clara go very still, "will there be food tomorrow?" Clara took a breath. She kept her face calm and steady, the same face she used in emergency rooms when she needed to be the most reliable thing in the room. "Yes, there will be food tomorrow. There will be food every day. You can eat as much as you want, whenever you want." Lily looked at her, and the expression on her face was not relief. It was something more complicated than relief. It was the face of someone who desperately wanted to believe something they had learned, through many repetitions, to be dangerous to believe. She ate the soup slowly, carefully, in small spoonfuls, watching Clara between each one as though waiting for the conditions to change. When the soup was half gone, she stopped and pulled the bowl toward herself and held it in her lap with both hands, like something precious. "Can I save the rest for later?" "Of course." She nodded once, with the gravity of someone completing an important transaction. When Alexander arrived at dawn, he had not slept. Clara suspected he had not even tried. He stood in the doorway and looked at the child, and something moved across his composed face like a shadow. He brought things, a stuffed bear, a warm blanket in soft yellow that he'd apparently sent Marcus to purchase from a 24-hour superstore at 4 in the morning, a bag of children's books. He stood at the doorway holding them, suddenly uncertain in a way that suited neither his face nor his posture. Lily stared at him, her arms tightening around the half-bowl of soup. "You brought me here," she said. "I did. You're not going to sell me?" The word "sell" landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Clara watched Alexander's jaw tighten. He walked to the chair beside Lily's bed and sat down, lowering himself deliberately to her level, and placed the yellow blanket at the foot of her bed without touching her. "I am not going to sell you," he said. "I am not going to hurt you. Nobody in this building is going to hurt you." Lily studied him with those unsettling, ancient eyes. "You're very clean," she said finally. "I suppose I am. Rich people are usually clean. Usually. Rich people at the home were clean too," she said. "But she stopped, pulled the blanket toward herself with one hand, keeping the soup bowl clutched in the other. "The bear is nice," she added, in the tone of someone offering a diplomatic concession. Clara found, suddenly, that she needed to look at the window for a moment. Later, when Lily had been coaxed into something approaching real sleep, curled on her side with the yellow blanket pulled up to her chin, the stuffed bear tucked under her arm, the half-bowl of soup set on the nightstand within her reach, Clara walked with Alexander down the quiet corridor. "She saved half the soup," Clara said. "I know. She's been trained to assume food can be taken away at any moment. I know." His voice was perfectly level. "I used to hide crusts of bread inside a loose brick in the wall. I was 7. Clara looked at him. He looked straight ahead. "That matters," she said quietly. "What happened to you matters. What matters right now," he said, "is that it doesn't happen to her. Not for one more day." He stopped walking. "Find out everything you can from her medical records. Whatever institution she came from. I'm going to make some calls. And the mark on her back? I have a very good idea where it comes from." His eyes were level and dark and utterly without hesitation. "I just need to confirm it." They came the very next afternoon. Clara was with Lily in the room. She had taken the unusual step of canceling her afternoon consultations and simply sitting with the girl, reading to her from one of Alexander's books, watching the cautious, incremental degrees by which Lily was permitting herself to relax, when a nurse knocked and entered with a tight, apologetic expression. "Dr. Hayes, there are 2 police officers downstairs, and a man who says he's the child's guardian. They're requesting immediate access to the patient." Lily stopped breathing. The change was instantaneous and total. The child who had, over the course of the morning, allowed herself to be persuaded into eating an entire breakfast and had even, once, produced something close to a fleeting smile, went rigid. The color drained out of her face. Her hands clenched in the sheets, knuckles white. "Sweetheart." Clara reached for her hand carefully. Lily gripped it with a ferocity that was startling. "Look at me. Look at my eyes." Lily looked. "You are not going anywhere. I promise you that. Not one step." Lily pressed her lips together and nodded once. Then she slid off the bed. Clara made a sound of protest and folded herself into the narrow gap between the bed and the wall, pulling the yellow blanket in after her, and went completely still. Clara looked at that small, hidden shape for a moment. Every clinical instinct in her body wanted to coax the child back into the open. Every human instinct recognized that this was not the moment to prioritize visibility over the child's own chosen safety. "Stay right there," she told Lily quietly. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." She walked out of the room, closed the door carefully, and went downstairs. The man waiting at the main reception desk was around 60, heavy-set, with silver hair swept back from a broad and carefully pleasant face. He wore a wool overcoat and a silk tie, and he held a pair of leather gloves in one hand. He looked exactly like the kind of man who inspired instinctive trust in people accustomed to authority, the practiced benevolence of someone who had spent decades perfecting the appearance of goodness. Beside him stood 2 uniformed police officers. "Dr. Hayes," the man said warmly, stepping forward. "Thomas Thatcher. I run the Sunshine Children's Home in Millbrook County. We have been absolutely sick with worry. One of our children went missing during the storm 2 nights ago, a little girl named Lily. I understand she was brought here." "She was," Clara said. "Thank God." He pressed a hand to his chest in a gesture of practiced relief. She has a condition. She can become confused, disoriented. She must have wandered. Mr. Thatcher, Clara said pleasantly. Are you Lily's named legal guardian? I am the director of the facility responsible for her care. That isn't what I asked. Are you, personally, her named legal guardian? Do you have documentation to that effect? A slight pause. As director of the facility, I'm going to need specific documentation. Clara smiled at him. The smile did not reach her eyes. Under the Millbrook County Child Protection and Welfare Act, Section 14, Subsection 3, any child admitted to a medical facility showing evidence of possible abuse must remain in the care of that facility pending investigation by the Office of Children and Family Services. Lily's admission notes document extensive injuries consistent with prolonged physical abuse, which triggers that provision automatically. One of the police officers shifted. Doctor, if the facility can demonstrate. Officer, are you aware that I am legally obligated to report these injuries, and that releasing the child before the OCFS investigation concludes would expose this hospital to significant legal liability? Clara's voice remained pleasant, measured, impeccably professional. I'm sure you understand that I can't compromise this institution's position by releasing the patient prematurely. The OCFS case number was filed this morning. She produced a folded document from her coat pocket and held it out. I'd be happy to give you the investigator's direct contact information. A silence settled over the reception area. Thatcher's pleasant face had undergone a subtle alteration. The warmth was still there, but underneath it, like a message in invisible ink, was something calculating and cold. Of course, he said, his smile remaining precisely in position. We want to cooperate fully. Could I see her, just for a moment? Just to confirm she's all right. I'm afraid patient confidentiality prevents me from permitting non-guardian access while the investigation is pending. Clara tilted her head slightly. I'm sure you understand. Alexander arrived as Thatcher was leaving. He appeared at the hospital entrance as Thatcher descended the front steps, and the two men looked at each other for a moment across the swept concrete. Clara, watching from just inside the glass doors, saw Thatcher's face change. Not much, a fractional tightening around the eyes, a microscopic adjustment of posture, the kind of involuntary recognition that the body produces before the mind can suppress it. Alexander said nothing. He walked past Thatcher without acknowledgement, came through the doors, and stood beside Clara. They both watched Thatcher get into a black SUV and pull away into the gray afternoon. He recognized you, Clara said. Yes. Alexander's voice was completely flat. And now he knows I know who he is. He turned to face her, and Clara saw in his expression the particular quality of absolute resolution. Not anger, not anymore. Something colder and more permanent than anger. The face of a man who has decided, and whose decisions do not change. I need to move you both somewhere safe, he said. Tonight. The Sterling estate sat 20 miles outside the city, set back from a private road behind gates of black iron and a security infrastructure that included 8 full-time armed personnel, a perimeter sensor network, and a surveillance system that Alexander had paid a defense contractor to design. Lily walked through the front entrance and stopped. The entrance hall was 3 stories, lit by a chandelier that threw warm amber light across marble floors. A staircase curved upward. Somewhere deeper in the house, a fire was burning, and the smell of wood smoke reached them all the way at the door. Lily stood with the yellow blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the stuffed bear held against her chest, and looked at it all with the wide, careful eyes of someone trying to determine whether something beautiful is a trap. This is where you live? She said. Yes, Alexander said. She was quiet for a moment. Are there other children here? No, just you for now. Oh, another pause. Is it all right if I walk on the floor? Clara made a sound she quickly converted into a cough. Yes, Alexander said, in a voice that was almost entirely steady. It is completely all right. Lily nodded once, made a careful step forward, then stopped and looked up at him. I can clean, she said, with the earnest precision of someone making a commercial offer. I'm very good at it. I can sweep and wash floors, and I'm small so I can reach behind furniture. I won't break anything. A pause. I can earn my place. Alexander crouched down to her level. He'd been doing this more, Clara noticed, lowering himself deliberately, refusing to loom. Lily, he said, You don't have to earn your place here. You don't have to clean, or be useful, or work for anything. You are here because you are a child who needed somewhere safe, and this is somewhere safe. That is the only reason. Do you understand? Lily looked at him with those careful, assessing eyes. But what do you get out of it? A silence stretched. Nothing, Alexander said. I don't get anything. That's how it's supposed to work when someone takes care of a child. Something flared briefly in Lily's expression, a flash of something raw and unguarded, as quickly suppressed as it had appeared, and she nodded once more, as though filing this information away for later consideration, not yet prepared to do anything as dangerous as believe it. That evening, Clara gave Lily a bath, washed her hair with patient gentleness, and dressed her in new pajamas that Alexander's assistant had somehow procured from a children's clothing store that afternoon. The pajamas had stars on them. Lily fingered the pattern for a long time before she said anything. They're soft. They are. Do I have to give them back? No, Clara said. They're yours. Lily's hands went still on the starry fabric. Clara tucked her into a bed layered with blankets and sat on the edge while Lily held the bear and looked at the ceiling. Her right hand was tucked under the pillow, and Clara could see the slight bulk of something. The bread roll from dinner, she realized. Lily had tucked it away without drawing attention to it, so quietly that no one had noticed. Just in case tomorrow came with empty hands. Clara. Lily's voice was very small. Yes. My back hurts. I know, sweetheart. I'm going to give you something for the pain. A pause. It's not as bad as it was. That's good. Clara. Again. Still here. Are you going to stay? The question was casual in its construction and devastating in what lay beneath it. The studied offhandness of someone who had practiced not caring about answers that might hurt them. Clara set down the glass of water she'd been holding. I'm going to stay until you fall asleep. And tomorrow morning, when you wake up, I'll be in the next room. Lily turned her face into the pillow. Okay, she said, muffled and very small. She was asleep within 10 minutes. Her brow did not fully smooth even in sleep. There was still a faint tension there, some vigilance running below consciousness that refused to be entirely switched off. Clara sat with her for a long time. In his study downstairs, Alexander made calls. His voice did not rise above a conversational level in any of them, and anyone listening would have been struck by the absolute measured calm of his instructions. The calm of a man who has moved a great deal of weight before and knows exactly how much force is required. By midnight, he knew the following. Thomas Thatcher had run the Sunshine Children's Home for 22 years. The facility received approximately $1.4 million per year in state funding and a further $800,000 annually in private charitable donations. The children housed there were kept under conditions that would have generated immediate intervention had anyone with genuine authority been looking. There were 7 employees. The Millbrook County Police Department had received 2 anonymous complaints about the facility in the past 3 years. Both had been closed without investigation by a detective named Rourke who had recently purchased a beach house on a civil servant's salary. And the thing he had suspected. Thomas Thatcher had previously operated a facility called Crestbrook Children's Home in upstate New York. It had closed 26 years ago, following a fire. The cause of the fire had never been officially determined. Alexander had lived at Crestbrook from the ages of 4 to 12. He sat very still with this information for a long time, looking at the fire burning in the study's hearth. Then he picked up his phone and made one final call. Hargrove, he said, I want everything. Every financial record. Every testimony, every suppressed complaint. I want a case that cannot be argued with. Start tonight. Thatcher moved faster than Alexander had anticipated. 3 days after Lily's arrival at the estate, a story appeared in the Millbrook County Courier beneath the headline, Billionaire accused of harboring runaway child, refuses cooperation with police. The article described, in tones of measured concern, how a respected charitable organization director had been unable to recover a vulnerable child under his care due to the alleged interference of a wealthy private citizen. An unnamed source suggested that Alexander Sterling's motives for keeping the child from her legal carers were troubling and unclear. By evening, one national entertainment news site had posted a piece featuring an old photograph of Alexander and the headline, CEO or Kidnapper. Marcus brought Alexander a printed copy. Alexander read it once. Without expression, set it on his desk, and was quiet for a long time. He's panicking, Clara said. She had been watching Alexander think. She'd been doing this more often lately, with her arms folded and her head tilted slightly. This is defensive. He's trying to control the narrative before your investigation surfaces anything actionable. I know. Then you know what he's expecting you to do. Alexander looked at her. He's expecting a denial, Clara said. A statement from your PR team, counter-accusations, a legal challenge. He's expecting you to fight him on his level. Public, messy, emotional. She unfolded her arms. He's expecting you to be angry. I am angry. But you're not going to be angry out loud. She met his eyes. Are you? A pause. Something moved in his expression, a flicker of what might, in someone less controlled, have been appreciation. I'm going to give him what he wants, Alexander said. A partial retreat. A quiet statement suggesting I've overstated my concerns, that I'm reconsidering my position. Make him think he's winning. Make him think the pressure is working. His voice was perfectly even. A cornered animal is dangerous. A confident one is easier to handle. Clara nodded slowly. And while he's celebrating, Hardrove's team finishes building the case. Alexander leaned back in his chair. We have financial records from 3 of his largest donors. We have testimony from 2 former Crestbrook residents, adults now, willing to go on record. We have the Millbrook records showing the suppressed complaints. We have Detective Rourke's beach house. How long do you need? 2 weeks. She looked at him steadily. He'll try something before 2 weeks. Yes, Alexander agreed, without expression. He will. He was right. It came on a Thursday, 11 days in, at 2 in the morning. Alexander was in the city for a meeting that could not be moved. Clara had argued against it, and he had assured her, with a thoroughness she had come to recognize as his way of addressing something he was privately uncertain about, that the estate's security was absolute. The estate's security was very good. It was not, as it turned out, quite absolute. They came in a group of 6, through the eastern perimeter where a relay in the sensor network had suffered a failure of the sort that could have been accidental or could have been engineered by someone with access to the contractor's schematics. They were not. Marcus would later report with grim professional displeasure, amateurs. Clara was awake. She frequently was, these days, somewhere in the gap between midnight and 3 where her mind refused to quiet. She was sitting in the kitchen with a mug of tea when the estate's internal alarm began to pulse, low and urgent. She put the mug down. She was moving before the pulse completed its second cycle. Lily's room. She had it prioritized automatically, the way she prioritized her sickest patients. Lily was awake, sitting up in bed, already utterly silent. She had been asleep. Clara knew she had been asleep, but whatever instincts had been hammered into her over 8 years had brought her upright and still and watchful before the alarm had even fully registered. She looked at Clara. We have to go, she said. Yes. Clara held out her hand. Right now. Lily took her hand without hesitation. Clara had asked Alexander, 3 days after their arrival, to show her the estate's safety features, not out of curiosity, but with a specific flatness of tone that made him understand she was asking because she intended to use the knowledge. He had taken her through everything. The panic room on the lower level, the emergency protocols, the hidden service corridor between the east wing and the lower level. She took them through the service corridor now, Lily's small hand gripped in hers, moving fast and silent. She could hear, somewhere above and behind them, the careful, systematic sound of people searching. The panic room was steel-reinforced and equipped with communication equipment, a camera network covering the interior of the estate, and enough supplies for 72 hours. Clara locked the door, activated the camera network, and called Marcus's emergency line. Already aware, Marcus said, Sterling's inbound. ETA 14 minutes. Sit tight. She sat tight. Lily pressed herself against the wall beside Clara and looked at the camera monitors, 6 of them, showing figures moving through the main corridor. Are those the men from the home? She asked. Her voice was controlled, almost clinical. Clara recognized the dissociation of a child who had learned that panic was not a luxury available to her. I don't know. Lily studied the monitors. The tall one on the left has the same boots as Mr. Doran, she said quietly. He's the one who, she stopped, looked at her own hands. He has the same boots. Clara pulled Lily closer, and Lily, to Clara's quiet astonishment, allowed herself to be held. She was rigid, wire taut, every muscle compressed. But she did not pull away. 13 minutes and 40 seconds after the call, they heard a helicopter. 2 minutes later, the communication system crackled. "Building is clear," Marcus said. "You can open the door." Clara opened the door. Alexander was in the corridor. He was still in his meeting clothes, and he looked at Lily first, and then at Clara, and the expression on his face was something she had not seen from him before. Undisguised, unmanaged, the raw material of relief so intense it bordered on pain. "You're all right," he said. His voice was not entirely even. Lily stepped forward and, with the decisive spontaneity that children occasionally produce when they have abandoned calculation, wrapped both arms around Alexander's waist. He was still for one stunned moment. Then his hands came down and closed around her, careful as a man holding something irreplaceable. Clara watched this. She pressed her lips together and looked at the opposite wall for a moment. "He sent them," Alexander said, over Lily's head. He looked at Clara directly, and he gave us exactly what we needed. The sensor relay that was disabled required inside knowledge of the contractor's work. His jaw was set, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. "It's the last piece we needed." The Meridian annual charity gala was, by long tradition, the social event of the season. 1,500 guests, 3 courses, a live auction, and a keynote address delivered every year by the same individual. Thomas Thatcher, chairman of the Sunshine Foundation, whose work on behalf of disadvantaged children had made him, for 2 decades, one of the most beloved figures in the city's philanthropic landscape. He took the stage at 8:45 p.m., as he always did, to a standing ovation. He had been troubled this past week. Sterling's public statement had seemed to signal a retreat, and the attempt to recover the girl had failed. A temporary setback, his attorney had reassured him. Still, there was a background unease he'd been unable to fully suppress. Sterling's name, his history with Crestbrook, he'd told himself it couldn't be significant, that the billionaire was bluffing, that any legal action would be tied up for years. He took the stage. The spotlight was warm. The audience was attentive. "Every year," he began, "I stand on this stage and tell you that the work we do changes lives." The presentation screen behind him went dark. A murmur moved through 1,500 people. Then the screen illuminated again. It did not show the Sunshine Foundation's annual reel. The first image was a financial document. Audited records showing the systematic diversion of $2.3 million in charitable donations from the Sunshine Foundation's public accounts into a series of shell companies over 8 years. Every relevant figure was highlighted. The document was annotated with the precision of something prepared to withstand any legal challenge. The murmur became a noise. The second image was a medical report. The aggregate findings from examinations of 11 children across 2 facilities over 15 years, presented by Dr. Clara Hayes in her capacity as a medical consultant to the Office of Children and Family Services. The language was clinical and precise and entirely devastating. The noise became something louder. The third image was a deposition, transcribed testimony from 3 adults, former residents of Crestbrook Children's Home, each describing in the careful, controlled language of people who had rehearsed their words because they needed to be exact what had happened to them under Thomas Thatcher's directorship. Each testimony concluded with a physical description of the brand. The fourth image was a photograph of Lily's shoulder blade. Thatcher had not moved since the screen changed. He stood at the podium, his prepared speech in his hand, and he had the appearance of a man watching the ground open beneath him. In the 4th row of the audience, Alexander Sterling rose from his seat. He had arrived late, slipping in through a side entrance with Clara on his arm, and they had taken 2 unremarkable seats near the aisle. He walked up the central aisle now, unhurried, his expression composed and utterly cold. The room parted for him, one of those instinctive adjustments that spaces make for people who possess the specific kind of authority he carried. Clara walked beside him. She had chosen tonight to wear a dress in deep burgundy, and her chin was level, her posture straight. She looked like someone who had decided something and was not interested in discussing the decision. Alexander stepped onto the stage. He did not look at Thatcher. He turned to face the audience. "My name is Alexander Sterling." The microphone carried his voice clearly through the sudden silence. "Some of you know me. What you're seeing on this screen is a fraction of the evidence compiled over the past 2 weeks by my legal team in cooperation with the state's Office of Children and Family Services and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He paused, letting that land fully. Mr. Thatcher has operated 2 facilities over 25 years. Both were funded by people in this room. People who believed, sincerely, that they were helping children. I was one of those children. An 8-year-old girl in my care right now is another. There are others. Another pause. The FBI has everything they need. Tonight is, for Mr. Thatcher, the end of a great many things. 3 men in dark suits had appeared at the edges of the stage. Mr. Thatcher, Alexander said, finally turning to look at him. Only at the last moment, and his voice did not change, did not rise, remained perfectly, terribly level. You burned something into me 26 years ago that I have carried every single day since. Tonight, I'm giving it back. 2 of the suited men reached the stage. Thatcher's mouth opened. What came out was not a denial or an accusation, but something smaller, a thin, unintelligible sound, the last air leaving a collapsed structure. He was escorted from the stage with his hands behind his back. In 1,500 people, there was complete silence. Then Clara's hand found Alexander's arm, and he let out a breath, slow, controlled, almost silent, and it carried with it 26 years of weight that had nowhere left to go. 3 days later, someone left the curtains open. It was a small oversight, a simple failure to close fabric against glass. But the result was that at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, pale winter sunlight came through the window of Lily's bedroom for the first time since her arrival and lay across her face in a long, warm band. She woke up. She lay still for a moment, as she always did upon waking, running through the sequence of assessments she had developed over years. Where was she? What sounds were present? What was required of her? She identified the room. Her room. She was tentatively beginning to locate it as such. Identified the light. Identified the distant sounds of the kitchen. Identified the smell of something being cooked. She lay there in the warm winter light with the yellow blanket pulled up to her chin and the stuffed bear under her arm. And then, from somewhere she had not expected and could not have predicted, something came up through her. It was not a sound she had made before. It was not a scream or a cry or the careful, suppressed weeping of someone trying not to be heard. It came from somewhere below language, below thought, below all of the careful management she had built over 8 years. A full, heaving sob, the kind that takes over the whole body, that cannot be controlled or shaped or made quiet. The kind children are supposed to be allowed to make. It frightened her. Crying loudly had not, in her experience, been safe. And yet it kept coming. Clara was at the door in 30 seconds. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Lily into her lap, and held her the way she had not been held since before she could remember, and said nothing, because nothing was required. Lily cried for a long time, not with restraint, not with suppression, not with one eye on the door. She cried the way children are supposed to be able to cry, with their whole selves, safe enough to be completely undone. Alexander appeared in the doorway at some point. Clara looked at him over Lily's shaking back, and he stayed in the doorway with one hand against the frame, watching, and his face held something that was not its usual composition. Something open, something that had set down a great weight. Eventually the crying slowed, then stopped. Lily pressed her face against Clara's shoulder and breathed. The morning light was still there. The blanket was still warm. Outside, the snow was still falling, soft and steady, as it had been falling for months. And somewhere below, the kitchen smelled of pancakes. And then, from somewhere in the warmth and the quiet and the accumulated evidence of 4 weeks of safety, a word, directed at the man in the doorway, barely audible at first, and then repeated, slightly louder, with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing something. Daddy. Alexander moved away from the doorframe. He crossed the room in 4 steps and sat on the bed beside them. And Lily turned and wrapped both arms around his neck, and he held her the way he'd been afraid to hold her at first, tight, unhesitant, completely present. His eyes were closed. The muscle in his jaw moved once. He did not cry. He had not cried since he was 9 years old, and the vow held. But Clara, watching his face over Lily's small head, watched something in him. A great locked door that had stood closed for 26 years, open at last, quietly, and without ceremony, in the thin winter light. She looked away, to give him that privately. She felt his free hand find hers, and hold it. She looked back. He said nothing. She said nothing. Lily had fallen into a loose, exhausted quiet between them. They sat there in the morning light, the three of them, for a long time. For months later, the fire had been going since 5 o'clock. Lily had developed a specific ritual around it. She helped stack the logs, which she took very seriously. She watched the lighting of it with an expression of grave professional interest, and once it was properly established, she situated herself on the hearthrug with extraordinary deliberateness, close enough to feel the warmth fully, surrounded by her books and the bear and a rotating collection of other objects she had accumulated and was only now learning to leave scattered around a room, without needing to pack them away in case she had to leave quickly. It was February. The snow was still heavy outside. The winter had been stubborn this year, but inside the estate's sitting room, the light was warm and amber and smelled of wood smoke and the hot chocolate that Clara had made in the kitchen and left steaming on the low table. Lily was reading. She read with focused absorption, her feet tucked under her, her whole posture given over to the book with the trust of someone who has learned, incrementally and at some cost, that it is safe to be absorbed. She had been, as it turned out, a ferociously intelligent child. The evidence of this had taken some time to surface through all the other things that had required addressing first, but it was unmistakable once it arrived. Her private tutor described it, with some bewilderment, as remarkable. Clara described it, more accurately, as what happens when you give a starving mind enough food. She had also, over the past 4 months, developed an appropriately 8-year-old relationship with the concept of disagreement. She had opinions now, and she expressed them, and she was sometimes spectacularly wrong about things and occasionally spectacularly right, and the arguments she produced in defense of both were equally spirited. Alexander had informed her, the first time she argued back about something directly, that she was infuriating. Lily had considered this and concluded, correctly, that he was mostly delighted. Clara came in from the kitchen, settled into the large chair nearest the fire, and tucked her feet up. She had reduced her hospital schedule 2 months ago, her own choice, a rebalancing she had not expected to make, but had found unavoidable, the way certain decisions become unavoidable when you stop pretending they're choices and recognize them as facts. She still worked. She still loved her work. She had simply discovered that the perimeter of the things she loved had quietly expanded to include a sitting room with a fire and a child arguing about dragon anatomy on the hearthrug. Alexander came in last. He set down his phone. He was always on a call. The Empire did not particularly reduce its demands based on personal circumstances, although he had become somewhat better at ending calls when required, and looked at the room. Clara in her chair, Lily on the hearthrug, the fire, the 3 cups of chocolate. Something settled in his expression. It had taken Clara a long time to identify it, because she had initially not recognized it as an expression at all. It was the face of a man who was simply, quietly at rest. He sat down beside Clara, and she shifted to make room without actually moving very far, and he stayed in the space she'd made for him. Thatcher's attorney filed another appeal. He said, not as a worry, but as information, something to be noted and set aside in its proper place. Hargrove's handling it. Hargrove described it as, and I'm quoting, the legal equivalent of a screen door on a submarine. Clara made a soft sound of satisfaction. And Detective Rourke? Lost his badge. The beach house is under seizure review. A pause. The 11 children from the Millbrook facility have all been placed. 3 have been adopted. Good, Clara said quietly and completely. A silence. Comfortable. Full. The kind that only exists between people who have stopped needing to fill it. Lily looked up from her book. She still did this, Clara knew, listened even while reading, monitored the room even when apparently absorbed elsewhere. Her therapist said it would diminish gradually, given time and safety and sufficient evidence that safety was permanent. They were building that evidence, day by day, in the currency of ordinary things, food on the table, voices that did not rise in anger, doors that opened from the inside. Is everything okay? Lily asked. Automatic, careful, still checking. Everything is fine, Alexander said. How's the book? She considered this with appropriate gravity. The dragon has too many eyes. I don't think that's anatomically possible. There aren't many verified accounts of dragon anatomy. She gave him the look she reserved for statements she considered insufficiently rigorous. There aren't any dragons. That you know of. She returned to the book. the corner of her mouth performing a movement she had not quite given permission for. Clara watched Alexander from the corner of her eye. He had been touching something in his pocket for 2 days, a small, unconscious motion she had noticed and filed away without comment. She had developed, over 4 months, a fairly complete map of his unconscious behaviors, which she suspected he would find extremely irritating if she mentioned it, and which she therefore found privately fascinating. He reached into his pocket. He took a breath, barely audible, the smallest concession his composure would permit. Clara. She turned. He was holding a ring box. Small, dark velvet, entirely unremarkable in every way except that it existed, and it was in his hands, and his hands, which she had never once seen unsteady, were not, quite, entirely steady. "I am not," he said, "a man who rehearses speeches. I know. I have attempted, twice, to prepare something appropriate to say." A pause. Both attempts were embarrassing. Clara's mouth curved. Were they? "I grew up being told I wasn't someone who deserved things," he said, simply, directly, with the quality of someone who has decided to say a true thing rather than an eloquent one. "A home, a family, someone who stays." He looked at her. "You have been consistently wrong about that assumption on my behalf. For 4 months. Longer, I think," Clara said softly. "I would very much like you to stay," he said. "Permanently, if you're willing." On the hearthrug, Lily had closed her book and was watching with unconcealed interest and the supreme patience of someone who has already privately determined the outcome and is simply waiting for the adults to catch up. Clara looked at this man, the one she'd met in a hospital corridor 4 months ago, carrying a bleeding child in his arms and wearing a face that gave nothing away. She thought about every careful increment since then, every wall tested, every door tried, every moment of accidental honesty that he'd regretted briefly and she had quietly, carefully kept safe for him. She thought about what warmth felt like when it was not temporary, when it was not contingent, when it was simply, finally home. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." From the hearthrug, Lily produced a sound of profound satisfaction. She returned to her book immediately, then put it down again. "Are we going to celebrate?" she asked. "Because I think we should celebrate. What do you consider appropriate?" Alexander asked, with the gravity he reserved specifically for Lily's important questions. She considered. "The very large cake from the bakery. The one with the layers." "Done. And hot chocolate." "We already have hot chocolate." "More hot chocolate." A pause. "And can the fire stay on all night?" Alexander looked at her, looked at Clara, looked at the room, warm and lit, and holding everything that a room requires to be a home. "Yes," he said. "The fire stays on all night." Lily smiled. She did not smile the way she had in those first weeks, the small, testing smile, the one with the calculation behind it, offered like a coin to pay for continued safety. She smiled the way she had been slowly, haltingly, persistently learning to smile, with her whole face, unself-consciously, the full unguarded expression of a child who has finally, irrevocably, been convinced. She settled back into the hearthrug with her book in her bare and reached for the hot chocolate with both hands, and held the warm cup to her face the way she had once pressed her cold hands to the engine of a stranger's car. Only this warmth did not run out, and no one would ask her to leave it, and tomorrow it would still be here. Outside, the snow fell softly on the long winter. Inside, the fire burned on. Lily had once pressed her frozen fingers to an engine in a blizzard, seeking the smallest fraction of warmth that the world might permit her to have without cost. She had found instead, as she looked up now at the man who crouched down to her level and the woman who sat with her until she slept, at the yellow blanket folded on the arm of the sofa, and the bread she no longer needed to hide under her pillow, that the world had been holding in reserve for her, all along, something far greater than she had ever thought to ask for. She had found the one thing no brand could mark and no cold could reach, the warmth of people who had chosen her completely and would choose her again every day for the rest of her life.